Well, welcome to our final lunch lecture of the 2014-2015 season. And we've already started plotting 2015-2016, so we'll give you a little more of a preview of that at the end of today's talk. This is a musical mystery, and I will tell you already that at the end of the half an hour, you will be the judge and jury. I don't know the answer. We'll begin our hunt for clues, by listening to a flute duet in G major, and I'm so grateful to Peter and Lissie Shanahan for coming and being our musicians. Thank you so much for being with us. We will hear duet number 6 in G major. It's 2 movements. So, what's the mystery? The number one question is, who wrote them? And the mystery was always here. I had even looked at these pieces some years ago, about 15 or 20 years ago. When Jim Bates was assistant director of the Moravian Music Foundation, he compiled a list of flute music that was in the Salem Collegium Musicum collection here. And I had looked at it. I'm a flute player. I'd looked at all of it. But, you know, with one thing and another, the odd doctoral dissertation somebody's working on, the occasional music festival, or recording a publication here and there, I just never got around to studying these things. Until, that is, January of 2014. In January of 2014, Tiffany Jarrett, then a senior at Salem College, came to do a month-long internship with us. Tiffany is a flute player. One of the things we love to do with our interns is to give them a photocopy of a piece of music out of the vault and let them prepare an edition. Let them get the thing ready to play now. They learn how to do it the old-fashioned way by just chugging away at it. Well, Tiffany spent countless hours putting this music into the computer, taking what was originally a set of pages with only the first flute part and a different set of pages with only the second flute part, and putting them together. So my job with anybody who's done an edition then like that is to proofread. So Tiffany would send me 5 or 6 pages of music at a time. There's something like 40 pages of flute music here. She would send me something like 5 or 6 pages at a time, and I'd pull out my copy from the manuscript and check each note, each rhythm, each little sharp or flat, each little trill or mordant or other forte or piano marking, every little detail, and send them back to Tiffany for corrections. They didn't take many corrections. She did a really good job. And one afternoon, while I was proofreading these things, I found myself thinking, if you've proofread music before, if you're a musician, you really can't do it without hearing it in your head. And if it's for your instrument, you find yourself fingering it. You just do. It's what happens. And I heard myself thinking, gee, that phrase didn't go where I thought it was going to go. Or I thought that was going to be a 4-measure phrase, but it's only 3. Or it's 5. Or that's an unusual and really complicated ornament. I kept noticing little quirks about these pieces, and over a couple of hours' time, the realization slowly dawned on me that I was noticing the same quirks similar to what I had noticed 15 years earlier when I was proofreading a new edition of Johann Friedrich Peter's string quintets. I had said then, that phrase doesn't go where I thought it was going to go. That's a really complicated ornament. And Peter's string quintets were written in 1789, a year before these duets were copied. We'll look at several pieces of evidence here. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a detective. And so I am. But we are not following bloody footprints. We're not looking for fingerprints on the murder weapon. We're looking for compositional fingerprints on a manuscript. We're looking to see who might have written these duets and what are the clues. And since there's no chance that this investigation is going to ever lead to a criminal case, I don't have to withhold evidence for the sake of prejudicing a jury. I can tell you everything I know, and then you can be the jury. So could they possibly have been written by Brother Peter? If they were, how might I know that? What could be some evidence I could present to you, members of the jury? Let me outline a case. First, the evidence of the signature on the cover. These flute duets are not the only music Peter wrote down in the 1780s during his 10-year living in Salem. During that time, he copied at least 14 instrumental works by other composers, by at least 10 different other composers. The ones he copied in 1785, he signed in a manner similar to what we see on these duets. On these duets, we see a signature down in the bottom corner, that lower right corner. It's very, very thin, but it's there. So he signed pieces he copied in 1785, he signed the same way. He copied some pieces in 1786 and 1787, and he didn't put his name on the bottom. And he copied an additional set of 6 flute duets in 1790, 3 days before these that we are now studying. So, and those he also signed in the same way. So it's a little bit clearer on this slide, that bottom right corner. Johann Friedrich Peter, 5th January, 1790. So the existence, therefore, of a signature on the cover really does or doesn't tell us anything, does it? He signed some of them, he didn't sign some of them. The 6 string quintets were written in 1789, and these he did sign in a slightly different way. That signature has on it, it's a little light, a little hard to read. You see 6 quintets, 2 violins, 2 violas, and cello, D-I, J. Frederick Peter. So he put the little D-I, or by Peter, on that. He didn't on the duets. These quintets also, to the best of my knowledge, are the only music that he wrote during his time at Salem, which he took with him when he went to Bethlehem. Not just a copy, he took the only copies. The only copies of the quintets that survive are in the Bethlehem collections. He took them with him when he left here. He didn't do that with the duets. To the best of my knowledge, the only copy of the duets is here. So the quintets, he claimed these to be his own. He doesn't claim the duets. Judgment, did he or did he not write the duets? Signatures don't tell us a thing. So let's keep looking. What's the next piece? What about anthems that included flute parts? In the 1780s, which pieces did he write while he lived here that had flute parts? None written prior to 1786 have flute parts. He wrote for flute before 1786, but not while he was here. It was when he was in Bethlehem before coming down here in 1780. 3 of his anthems that were dated 1780, by the way, have flute parts in their copies in Bethlehem, but not in the copies that were in use here. So my sense is he probably didn't have a couple of really capable flute players in Salem in the early 1780s. If there were flute players in Salem at the time, they were also busy playing violin or viola or singing or doing something else. He didn't have a lot of flute players around. If he'd had them, he'd have written for them. Starting in September of 1786, though, he wrote 6 anthems that do have parts for 1 or 2 flutes. Most have parts for 2 flutes, and they're pretty good flute parts. So by September of 1786, then, he had at least 2 competent flute players he could call on. And the flute parts in the anthems show that he did know how to handle the instrument. These pieces are not only pretty, they're fun to play, and they can be a little challenging for an amateur player. So Peter and Lissie, I'll ask you if you'll play a sample of this. They're not playing from this manuscript. They're playing from an edition of this manuscript. You shall in Jerusalem rejoice. So yeah, that's a whole lot. They're playing from something that's a little bit easier to read. They're just going to do the first 12 measures or so to show you that, yes, Brother Peter knew how to write for flute. So. Yeah, see, he knew how to write for the instrument, and he had some players who knew how to play. Who might these flute players have been? I haven't a clue. There are several candidates I could identify, and based on a note that in December 24th of 1788 at Bethabara, the Brethren Christ, Fritz, and Lesch played music for a children's love feast on clavier, violin, and flute. We don't know which of them was the flutist, or whether 2 of the 3 of them were. We don't know that. We don't know what music they played. Well, Jakob Lesch was a multi-talented man, and he was the one who was trusted to tune the Tannenberg organ. in accordance with Tannenberg's own directions. So we know he was musical. We don't know if he was a flutist. His memoir doesn't mention his music. Rudolf Christ was noted to be a musician, and his memoir says he took a lot of joy in music, especially singing, and he also taught trombone. Johann Christian Fritz was pastor at Hope, Moravian, from January of 1780 through September of 1788. We don't have his memoir here, and we don't know what he played. So I don't know who the flutists were. Was Brother Peter one of them? Was one of his students the other one? So, looking on, we don't know who played the music. But what about the end of these pieces? Well, the cover, I don't know if you noticed a few slides back, the cover said 12 duets. The set ends with duet 11. Looking at the manuscript, you note that at the end of the flute one part, there's 2 blank lines at the bottom. Those are hand-drawn music staves. So he expected to fill a whole page, maybe. Maybe he just drew a whole page not knowing how he was going to fill out. But if you turn that piece of paper over, what do you find? You find a whole blank page of paper on the back side. He had drawn lines on both sides of that page. That's unusual in Peter's work that I've seen. The second flute part is even more dramatic. Flute 2 ends at the bottom of the page. There's music all the way down to the bottom of the page. And when you turn it over, you get a whole blank page and another loose sheet of blank music lines. He's got enough lines there to write another duet, because the duets tended to take 2 pages roughly of music. He's got enough space there to write them. So we don't know. He thought he was going to have 12 copied or composed. That's what he put on the cover. But there's only 11, so he either didn't get around to copying the 12th one or didn't get around to writing the 12th one. I don't know. So let's just take a little break and reflect a minute. Did he or did he not compose the pieces? Well, how might I prove that he didn't? How did Perry Mason ever prove his client wasn't the murderer? He found the real murderer. So if I could find the real composer, I'd have my answer. But I'm not going to be able to do this within a 50-minute television show or a half-an-hour lunch lecture, maybe even a 30-year career. So far, I've done a few things to look. First thing I did was I asked Philip Dunnigan. Philip has the most capacious memory for music and most anything else of anybody I've ever known. And I thought, if these exist anywhere, Philip will know them. And Philip's comment, after looking through them, was, I've never seen anything like this. Second, I've gone through the Breitkopf thematic catalog of music published by Breitkopf and Hertel, who was the premier music publisher of the later 18th century. And you know what? They're not there. And third, I compared these duets to other sets of duets written by the composer to whom Peter attributed the other set he copied in January of 1790. I know there's 14 sets of flute duets flying around the room about now, I know. They're the ones that we're working on that I'm calling the anonymous duets. Then there's another set that he copied 3 days earlier that he attributed to Matthias Staubinger, a German-born composer who spent his life in France and mostly in Italy. Staubinger was known to have written 3 sets of flute duets, 2 sets of 6 duets each, and 1 set of 5 duets. Well, I have copies of the set of 5. I have the musical incipits of 1 of the sets of 6. I was hoping we would have 5 duets by him and 6 duets by him, and all of a sudden, here are the 11 duets. Not so. None of them match. The other set of 6, according to the Breitkopf thematic catalog, was entitled Duos Concertantes, or not Breitkopf, according to music historians, are called Duos Concertantes. That implies longer and more complicated works. These 11 duets are not terribly long and not all that complicated. So these don't sound like Duos Concertantes to me. Besides, there were only supposed to be 6 of them, and there are 11 of these. Let's listen to more music. Here is Duet number 9 in A major. moving on. What about these two sets of flute duets copied 3 days apart from each other? Peter attributed one set, the ones copied on 5th of January of 17, those should say 1790. Those slides are wrong. Those should say 5th of January and 8th of January 1790. Is when he copied these. He attributed this set on the left to Matthias Stabinger. But Philip discovered some years ago that they may well be more accurately attributed to one Jakob Kleinknecht, though no other copy is known to exist. So we have Brother Peter saying there by Stabinger. We have the Breitkopf and Hertel Thematic Catalog saying there by Kleinknecht. That's the only evidence we have either way. In keeping with Brother Peter's attribution, I'll refer to these as the Stabinger duets, although I suspect they really are Kleinknecht. Are you confused yet? First, there's several similarities between these two sets of duets. First, there's a rhythmic pattern that appears in Anonymous Duet 6. It's called the Lombard rhythm or Scotch snap, though it has nothing to do with Lombard or Scotland. It's a short, long, short, long, short, long sort of rhythm. And we'll ask you to play for us measures 7 and 8 of the Allegro of Anonymous Duet 6. And then they'll take a breath and then play measures 5 through 8 of one of the Stabinger duets. So you hear the da-da, da-da, da-da. This rhythm, by the way, does appear in other works by Peter, most notably in his most famous duet, It Is a Precious Thing. Little snippet about that duet, by the way, is that Brother Peter based the opening of that duet on a vocal duet by the same name by Christian Gregor. That duet, Gregor's duet, begins like this. Well, Brother Peter wrote, same opening, just different rhythm. Did Brother Peter know Brother Gregor's duet? You bet he did. He copied it. There's a copy in Bethlehem dated 1770 of Gregor's duet, and Peter's duet was written in 1772. So yes, he knew it. And going back to the comparison of flute duets again. Let me skip back to flute duets. The phrase structure is similar in the two sets of duets. In both sets, occasionally we have a sense that the music begins with a question, followed by an answer, and then another answer. The musicians would call this antecedent, consequent. So it's like, I'm going to finish, I'm going to ask your question, I'm going to answer it, then I'm going to answer it again in a slightly different manner, a little more emphatic. We hear the first 3 measures of Anonymous Duet 9, followed by the first 3 measures of Duet 6 of the Stabinger set. So here it had a short question and then an answer and then another answer. Other rhythmic quirks, I'm going to skip a few of these in the interest of time. I know you all are fascinated by this, but we don't have all day. The one I do want to go to is what you all have as example 6. A striking similarity between opening themes of the Andante of Anonymous Duet 5 and the Allegro of Stabinger Duet 4. So we'll hear Anonymous Duet 5 and then Stabinger 4. So this is example 6. Mm-hmm. They sound a whole lot alike, don't they? So I leave it to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to determine whether these similarities are coincidental, just the result of a common musical language, whether they indicate that the anonymous duets are written by the same composer of the Staubinger-Kleinknecht set, or whether they indicate that the copyist of the first set became the composer of the second set using what he'd learned from copying. I don't know. One more bit of evidence. What about the string quintets that Peter wrote? There's the cover of the score and set of parts, again with the signature D. Johann Friedrich Peter. He wrote these, we know, they're dated 9th January 1789, almost exactly a year before the flute duets, and they're the only pieces of instrumental music clearly attributed to Peter in his own hand, that he's the only pieces of instrumental music he claimed. He said, these are mine. Now, there's some significant differences between the quintets and these anonymous duets. First, the quintets are a good bit longer, both in terms of number of movements, with 3 or 4 movements in each of the quintets versus 2 in each duet, and in terms of the length of each movement. The quintet movements are all a good bit longer. The texture in the quintets is a lot thicker. For one thing, you've got 5 instruments instead of just 2, but in the quintets, particularly the first and second violins are of equal importance, and they weave in amongst each other all the time. In the duets, the first flute is almost always the primary carrier of the melody. There's very few places. But there are some similarities, and those are what led me to start this investigation. First, the phrase structure, where sometimes you expect a 4-measure phrase, you get a 5-measure phrase, or 3 or 7. Both the quintets and the duets make extensive use of ornaments, lots of little trills, lots of little turns, and in ways that players of both tell me, that's a little harder than it looks. The fingers don't quite want to go there. Both the string quintets and the flute duets make extensive use of the parallel minor, and by that I mean when a piece is in a major key, they'll repeat the phrase in a minor key. So you'll get in major, and then you'd get in the minor. So that both the quintets and these duets do that. Both are marked by really slow harmonic rhythm. The basic harmony doesn't change very often, even when there are a lot of notes flying by. If you were playing a guitar or accompaniment underneath these flute duets, they'd be doing all the noodling and you'd be sitting there playing pretty simple chords. To understand the concept of harmonic rhythm, listen to 2 hymns. Bass line doesn't change much, does it? Instead, listen to this one. So a guitarist will go bananas trying to play chords on because it would be a different chord on every beat of that hymn. Well, the flute duets and the string quintets use a slow harmonic rhythm. The chords don't change very often. And one other little tiny thing about them, in the first duet, measures 8 and 9 shows a really quick contrast between forte and piano, between loud and soft. And I'll ask Peter and Lissie to play the beginning of that for us, example 7. To the beginning of Peter Quintet number 1, and you'll hear that same loud, soft, loud, soft. It's going to come by real fast. So, loud, soft, loud, soft. So, and it's very clearly marked on his score. So, all right, you can stop now. Okay, thank you. Don't play again. Well, all right, there you go. So both the quintets and the duets make use of that Lombard rhythm, da, 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 da. It's in several of the quintets. And finally, like the flute duets, the quintets become progressively more sophisticated, as if the composer is still exploring and learning how to write for this combination of instruments. They get harder and more complex and more interesting as they go along. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have been very patient and attentive as I have presented the case. You have seen the evidence of the signature on the cover, which was inconclusive. You have seen the evidence of anthems that include flute parts written during the 1780s. You have seen the evidence of the ending of Duet 11 and the missing Duet 12 with blank manuscript paper ready and waiting for it. You have seen the evidence of 2 sets of flute duets copied 3 days apart, both copied by Peter, and you've seen the evidence of the 6-string quintets. So as we listen to Duet 11, I invite you to ponder this evidence, and at the conclusion of the performance, I will ask, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for your verdict. Duet 11. Thank you, Peter and Lissie. That's gorgeous. So what do you think? I sure don't know.
Right, as a man who knows everything.
Yes, Philip, yes.
I would like to say you have got me completely bollocksed up now.
Okay, good.
Because I was convinced it was Salinger until you made the case.
And
I don't know what.
yeah, there you go. Neither do I.
Does anybody have an opinion?
Yes.
Let's hear the other 12.
There you go. Yes, Tom.
Isn't it unusual to have unbalanced phrases of three measures? And I mean, this is the classical period.
Well, it's a little earlier. Peter is writing in a sort of a mid-century style. A little more Rococo, he's not quite settled into high classicism, and he never did. Because while it was the high classical style was happening in Europe at the time, and some of the music was coming over here, he was still working from what he himself had written and what he'd heard in Germany before coming over here. So the compositions of the Moravians in North America are about a generation behind what's going on in Europe at the same time.
What about
Stavanger he should have been more in the classic, but he's not. So he's still again in that sort of in-between thing. He seemed to have never learned what Mozart and Haydn were all about. And this is some of the examples that I left out are details of the two sets of flute duets that are very, very similar. And the one question we haven't even begun to explore is, what was the source for his copying the Stavanger-Kleinknecht set? Where did he copy them from? And if he copied these, where did he copy them from? And we don't know that, because no other copy is known to exist. So the mysteries abound. Yes, Barbara?
A couple of things. I wonder if Rhythm with their intricate and all that.
I looked.
You looked.
I did. Yep, I searched. Nothing came up.
Okay.
Yep, there's a whole lot of things that come up with very similar themes, but after the first measure, they're somewhere different.
There's some.
Yep.
And then it struck me the first theme in this last, the first movement sounds very much like either an anthem or a hymn that we sing. Could you play that?
The opening of the last duet of the first movement.
First
The first movement, yeah.
It's like you knew where it was going before it went there, but I'm not quite sure where it came from. So it is. Richard agrees with you. So okay, we got several folks who said, yeah, we know this from somewhere. So, well, if you figure out where it's from, remind me, because I'm with you. I think I've heard it, but I sure couldn't name where it's from. Yes, Bill.
I'm not a musician, and I have no clues at all, particularly if the Flautmeister doesn't as good. But I have a more basic question. Why was music like these flute duets written in the first place? Who were they for? Were they written for young ladies to play in their parlors in the evening? Or were they written for a more sophisticated audience in a small concert?
The answer is probably yes. To all, and for instructional purposes, teachers would use them in flute lessons. My own flute lessons were filled with playing sight-reading flute duets. So they were written for enjoyment, for entertainment, for salon music, for king's courts. Frederick the Great was a flutist.
But not really for amateurs.
Well, but they were very capable amateurs, weren't they? Yeah. So, yes.
What was the protocol that they used in writing? Are you sure that the 11 that you got is the final copy, or would it have been a draft? And would you have written the music first and then written the title, or would you have written the title first and written the music?
That I have no way of knowing.
You can't relate the title
Yeah.
to the music. as a single item.
except that it's on the, here
What
is,
part of it is?
here is the manuscript with the title, and when you turn the page, you've got Duet 1.
And that's the only thing that's.
That's the
you don't
only-
know
right.
if the rest of it's part of it.
Well, it flows. I mean, so the next couple of pages are Duet 2, Duet 3, Duet 4, and all that in the same hand, in the same size of paper. And these have been together for a good long while here. So our sense is that it's the same set. And again, the blank piece of paper at the end, particularly the extra sheet at the end of Duet, of the second flute part, you don't find those in our pieces, but it's the same paper, it's the same hand-drawn lines, the same number of staves on the page. So, you know, we have to assume it's a set. So
Then would he have written the title first?
I don't know. I don't know of any way of knowing that. Yeah. So,
Was that standard at that time, to write your title and then write the music to fit the title?
I don't know.
It seems kind of odd.
Yeah, Peter.
We have to look at Johann Sebastian Bach. He wrote the so-called Orgelbüchlein, the little organ book, and he wrote the title, and he wrote the title of every piece, and he didn't finish this book. He had much more planned, and so you find examples before.
So again, we don't know whether he was composing or copying. So, yes, Fran.
What was his position here and what was it in Bethlehem?
He was here, he was record keeper, he was associate pastor, he was teacher, he was music director. If it needed doing, Brother Peter did it. And
All seasons.
it was a man for all seasons. When he left here in 1790, the elders had to work quite hard to figure out how to handle his musical responsibilities. They divided his musical responsibilities up among 5 other people to get them all covered. So that was just his musical responsibilities. He was record keeper in every board he was on because he had wonderful handwriting. Similar things in Bethlehem, teacher as well. Yes.
I think that the quintet that you showed had a score and then 5
Yes.
parts. But you only had parts for the
Right.
duets. Is it likely that there was a score with 2 parts, or was it be more typical that they would have just written the parts?
I think it's more typical just to have the parts. I'm not aware of any. I'm not aware of any other ensemble music in our collection for which there was a score and parts. And for the anthems, the Moravian anthems that had string parts and everything, there are very, very few that ever had scores. And those scores were copied not by the composer. So they tended not to make scores. So, you know, the existence of the score of the quintets is a little bit of an anomaly for us. Yes, Tom?
Can you say then overall that there was a similarity of musical outlook and practice between possibly 2 minds, Peter and this other person, and that whether these anonymous were by one or the other, we can be sure that these 2 mentalities, they're so similar.
They really are.
They have probably Peter had affinities for
Some, yeah. And there is a good bit of common musical language going around at this time. So if we pulled 50 sets of flute duets from 1790, probably at least 30 of them would have some of the same characteristics.
Maybe 1750.
Okay.
But it was, first of all these sets of duets, as they were published in this kind of little sets of sticks. The fact that this is in 12 contention, this just doesn't happen. Also, these are the kind of duets that Quantz in his letter to Telamon about his duets said, I like yours because it's got real counterpoint in it. And it's not just flutes playing in thirds.
Right.
Which is what they're doing most of the time in this. This has every mark of amateurism. And that's why you're convinced.
That's why I'm convinced. Look, there you go. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have gone way long. You have been very patient. Next fall, September 10th, we begin the series again with Richard doing an update on Records Cherokee. So come back on September 10th and we will continue. Thank you so very much. And thank you, Peter and Lissie.